federal court in New York, trial begins for 11 of the 12 communist leaders who are charged with a conspiracy to teach and advocate the forcible overthrow of the U.S. government. Party Chairman Foster is absent because of illness. With 400 police on hand, defense lawyers charge it's a police trial within an armed camp. Some of the pickets carry copies of the Communist Press, which doesn't think much of the trial. Others picketing the pickets don't think much of the communists. As the trial begins, none could say that freedom of speech was being denied inside the courthouse or out.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo with my co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson. We're online at what'sthepodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we filmed this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, contact us to our site at what'sthepodcast.com. Thank you. All right. Joining us today is Aaron J. Leonard. Aaron is an author and historian focused on the interplay of radicalism and repression. He has published 6 books, including Folk Singers and the Burrow and Meltdown Expected, Crises, Disorder, and Upheaval at the End of the 1970s. His latest book is Menace of Our Time, The Long War Against American Communism. He lives in Sacramento. Welcome, Aaron.
Oh, no, nice to be here and nice to meet you both.
Finally. I'll hand it over to you, Andy, so you can kick us off.
Yeah, I think people who've listened to our podcast know that we have had our hardship with people on the left, particularly around the COVID op and things like that. But as you notice, we're slowly working our way back and finding people from our radical tradition and reconnecting. And Aaron Leonard, you've heard his name before because he's very much for me connected now with my uncle Aaron, because I heard your voice first, Aaron, when you basically told the story of my uncle being a target of COINTELPRO, and that a major thing that had major disruption in our family and for decades and in his life was all at the center of that was some FBI agents who were going to mess with the Communist Party and were going to use him to do that. And I think you did a very important thing in this book, Menace of Our Time, to really show that the COINTEL program, which was famous for attacks on the Black Panther Party and for radical leftists in that 60s era, and Maoism and things like that, but that it had a history, that it was connected to a history of attacks by the state on the Communist Party. And COINTELPRO was just part of that project. And I think there's a lot of interesting things in this book. But I also want to say to people that this is not my first time meeting Aaron. When I reached out to him about how important this was to my uncle and to maybe have his kids be able to talk to him, he was immediately willing to do so. We had a long conversation. He showed me how he got information about the FBI files and the COINTELPRO files. So you have to know that this man is super nice and just super generous, which I think communists should be. And it's nice to see that a person whose politics are about changing the world are also reflected in just being a good person. So I'm really glad to have you on our show, and I really look forward to talking about this. And I even have questions from Michael Hoffman, who can't be here today.
Okay, great. Well, fire away.
Can I start here? Because a lot of times, for me, what's an interesting question is for you to talk about who you were before you started writing books that might have become the person who wrote all these books about Bob Dylan and folk singers, and really over the whole notion of state repression and the left and revolutionaries and political activists. So how do you see the journey you took in your own life that kind of led you to become a person who would write a book like this and others?
So I've got 6 books out now, and in every preface, well, I think most of them, I'm slowly kind of cobbling together a little bit of a memoir as to who I am. So, So if you really want the full story, buy all my books and read the preface. No. So I'm like at the end of the baby boom era. Yeah. So it's tough getting older and seeing all these generations coming up behind you and having no conception what it is to pass through enormous amounts of time. Actually, somebody posted on a podcast I did, oh, this guy's old, and then somebody jumped to my defense, which was kind of nice. But yeah, I'm old.
Yeah.
And newsflash, you're all headed in the same direction.
Yep. Yep.
Hopefully you're all gonna, kind of arrive at that same crossroads.
Yeah.
I say that by way of saying is I caught the tail end of the 60s. I was 13 in 1970, which was the high tide. I was in this working class town in the Rust Belt of New York State. It's a town called Herkimer. I think it was mainly Republican, pretty conservative, but there was a fairly good cohort of Democrats. But me and my friends became radical. We started a little kind of quasi-revolutionary group. We called ourselves the Stoned Rabbits People's Party. The school symbol was a magician pulling a rabbit out of the hat, so we took the identity of the rabbit. But we read John Sinclair and his Guitar Army. He had this White Panther Party modeled after the Black Panther Party, and from there started reading some of the radical classics, of Lenin, and especially Mao. Mao's Little Red Book was a big deal. So from the high school experience, I set off to the Northwest, where I actually reached out to Vietnam Veterans Against the War, who were working with the Revolutionary Communist Party had just been formed. It was the largest Maoist entity to come out of the late 60s. So I talked to this VVAW guy, who in turn put me in touch with the Unemployed Workers, which was a kind of a party-inspired entity. So that began a decades-long association with the Revolutionary Communist Party, which they're still around today. They've got a pretty sour reputation among the wider left as a cult around Bob Avakian, which certainly is, if you want to go through the definition of a cult, I mean, it does check a lot of the boxes. But I do remember watching a documentary about Jonestown, and one of the survivors said, well, they call us cultists, and they do that so they don't have to think about why we think the way we do, which is, not to say that everything was right. Obviously, it's hugely problematic, but I guess I would just caution people that, and I've done this myself, if you want to brand somebody a cult, fine. You still got the problem of looking up under the hood. What's the appeal? What's the appeal of Scientology when they sit down and audit you? What is it you're getting, and what makes people want that? So anyway, I worked with this group for a long time, and it wasn't until the early aughts that I kind of had a come to Jesus moment, such as it was, and left it. You put your life in with something, and you're vested. You see that a lot with these people voting for Trump. It's like, whoa, I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. That's a pretty shattering thing. So I've had this funny experience of working with this group for a very long time. And then when I left, I wanted to try to make sense of it. I thought I'd write a book. Basically, let's tease out the good and the bad. But then I started finding these FBI documents and realized two things. One, there was a huge investigation of this group that pretty much did not exist in the historiography. And two, people really didn't know the full story of the FBI, not just on the Revolutionary Union / Revolutionary Communist Party. They didn't know the story of the FBI in a good chunk of the 20th century. I mean, there was a lot of press around the Black Panthers, and a lot of it's kind of agenda driven. I mean, my colleague and I, Connor Gallagher, have written several pieces on Fred Hampton and discovered all kinds of new and interesting things, including, the FBI definitely had a hand in this, but the Chicago police had a bigger hand. But there was a whole thing going on against Hampton and the Students for a Democratic Society, which was the largest radical student organization, operating in the 60s. And, it's like people who want to poke the emperor, challenge the status quo. I guess it's Lao Tzu has this famous line, know the enemy, know yourself, and you can win 1,000 battles and never fear defeat, kind of one of these hyperbolic statements that has a basic fundamental truth. So I guess I've always kind of, or at least for a very long time, have appreciated that notion of knowing the enemy. And to the degree I have anything to offer the left, I kind of consider myself a lapsed Maoism. I've left a lot of that stuff behind, but to the degree I have anything to offer, it's in this work. So, and that's kind of a long explanation of who I am.
No, and maybe I'll add one more question or comment and question, Eduardo, and then maybe you can do your question. Because in many ways, I think what you just said about, well, first of all, what the idea of like how hard it is for somebody when you buy in to a project and then to see it break apart and in some case either betray you or something, have a break that is very unexpected. I think the very conclusion of your book speaks to that, getting that balance of that question right. Yes, there are problems with these groups. Yes, there are, like, they've had flaws, and you were talking in this case about in your Menace of Our Time, you're talking about the Communist Party, and I know you're thinking of that with the Maoist and the Revolutionary Communist Party, but you or say these things are not in isolation, and the state itself was coming in very heavy and trying to do things. So you ask the question, what would these things have been like without that? And what role did those play in distorting and twisting something that was trying to do good? And because you can't understand these things with just by demonizing the people who are part of this. And I mentioned a comrade of mine, Bruce Neuberger, who's probably the person that is a Maoist who I know the most. We've actually had him on our show to talk about his book, Lettuce Wars. And he's a determined revolutionary, and he never gave up on that project. And he's like I saw so many people your age and his age kind of give up, become Democrats. And it's been very inspirational for me to see people can go into their older age and not give up on that. So first I want to say that, but I do feel like that when I look at what you were doing with regards to state repression, is trying to understand also how this thing that was so important to you was kind of rotted out to extent.
Yeah, it's well, not quite sure how to respond to that. When I stopped working with the group, I pretty much went back and reread a lot of things from the standpoint of I no longer have a line I need to come up to. I mean, I kind of hit on this notion of the fetishization of political line. This idea that political line has almost something supernatural power to it. Mao had this famous saying, if you have the correct line, if you have no troops, you'll get troops, et cetera. And it's nonsense. I mean, maybe there's a certain poetic truth to it, and you definitely do need principles, and you need organization and all these things. But this thing that it's you can look at what Donald Trump is doing right now, where he's like, well, affordability is a hoax. You can talk and you can talk and you can talk, but there is objective reality, and kind of laying hold to objective reality it's a prickly business, because you sometimes discover things that you don't want to be true that actually are. So I left this group and I started reading all their literature, and I read some of went back and reread a lot of classics and attempted to do it more critically. And like some of it came up short and some of it didn't. And this evolutionary concept of things advanced by a lot of trial and error. I think Carl Sagan talks about this, but a lot of trial and error kind of brings us to where we are. I'm not cynical. I feel like humanity has advanced through a lot of forward and backward, including a lot of horrible things, but things that are generally favorable and positive for humanity tend to be held on to. Things that are negative, even though they can have an effect for quite long times, tend to be discarded.
Yep.
And it's not just a matter of will, or these are great ideas. It's like there's a materiality to it and stuff. So I guess we're just kind of going a little into philosophy, but I should start talking about the book, right? That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Eduardo?
No, I think that was a good way to start. Why don't we go delve into the book? I guess.
Yeah, and maybe I'll take it as so for me, I've made it just up to the underground again, the chapter on Prison in Pursuit. I haven't even gotten to my Uncle Aaron section yet, but so what I found in this so far is just a consistent, and I did not know how much and how long the Communist Party had been just target by FBI and the state. And I think the one story that I think I told you, I mentioned that really showed me just how deep they penetrated is this part on the trials of Luis Frena, where essentially Luis Frena was a founding member of the Communist Party of America, and this is 1919, author of Left Wing Manifesto. And essentially they had a guy with him, what was his name? Jacob Nosovsky, who is codename N100, who Nosovsky was an aide of his or a friend of his, or was going to accompany him to the Soviet Union, but was a spy. Like and he's next to this guy, this left winger. But later, the Finnish socialist, whose name was probably no, but I'm going to look. Ferdinand Peterson basically accuses, before he's able to go on his trip, he accuses Luis Frena of being, let's see, what was it? According to Peterson, this was however in this issue, according to Peterson, he had
saw
seen
him coming
Frena
out of a government building or something like that.
He had seen Frena at the Department of Justice headquarters in New York, an accusation he sent to so he was trying to expose this other guy, this Finnish socialist, Ferdinand Peterson, was trying to expose to the Soviets essentially that this guy is working with the U.S. government. That's what he was doing, if I get it right. But this guy himself was F-22, also an agent. So he has this one communist has an agent that's working with him, another socialist agent that accuses him of something. And then in the accusation of something, the other guy who is like the agent N100 basically defends Luis Frena and gets him off. It's so twisted. It's like, wow. And then later, Luis Frena finds out, okay, maybe there's something suspicious about you. But to know that both the accuser and the defender are both active spies, one being F-22 and one being N-100, that to me was just showed, it was synonymous with what I think was in this book, which is they get you coming and going. And I really feel like this book does a good job of showing how much of a threat, as much as I have criticism of the Communist Party, how much of a threat they saw the Communist Party as being.
It's fascinating because I feel like we need to trot Glenn Beck out here with the red threads and all the little points. Well, there's this famous famous little slogan, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Right.
So stepping back a little bit, so the Communist Party USA, right? So I kind of came up in this Maoist milieu, and we thought the Communist Party, they're revisionist, they're pro-Soviets, oh, who needs them? They're always running in elections, blah, 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 blah. And then they're saying about Maoist and other ultra leftists, they're impetuous, they're infantile, they think everything can change overnight, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
I think Gus Hall said, he called them TV radicals or whatever. And I say in the introduction, the problem is we were both right. But then a bigger question is okay, but was the existence of the Communist Party a good thing or a bad thing? Especially, in their most vital periods, the 20s and 30s, into the 40s. And I think you'd have to say yes, that they attracted, the best, the most visionary, the most caring people, or they attracted at least among, the best, humanity had brought forward. I mean, these people were, just really on the cutting edge in terms of anti-racism, pro-union, for caring for the unemployed and the people who were needing. They stuck their necks out. They went to jail. They got beaten up. They were maligned in the press. They did all these things. And then just to dismiss all that as, well, they're a bunch of stinking revisionists. I mean, it's just, again, it's like, you're not thinking. You're not giving them the trouble to kind of dig beneath the surface. And, within that, you can and should be critical. And I think you can say that pretty much about any entity. I mean, the hierarchy, the democratic centralism, the commandism, the taking marching orders from the Soviet Union, the waving of the American flag, all these things are, not things I think are good things. Opposite things can be true.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to advance, again on this subject of humanity, we have to kind of be mature enough to deal with that fact, and then really try to push forward the positive things. So, so that's the CP and why I started looking. I was actually going to write a book about the underground operations of the CP, which I thought would be a really interesting thing because, they did have a secret apparatus and, there's a fair amount of literature out there that I could draw on. But as I started to work on that, the obvious question is, well, why would they have an underground apparatus? Well, part of it is, espionage for the Soviet Union and, kind of international global politics. That's certainly true. But the other thing is like, as much as U.S. society touts itself as open and democratic with all these boundless freedoms, that's actually not true if you are in fundamental contradiction or in fundamental opposition to what it's all about. I mean, it's rational. It's rational that the powers to be of U.S. society doesn't want people who want to get rid of it to succeed. But they do have laws. They have rules. I think 1969, Brandenburg versus Ohio, famous Supreme Court ruling that overturned a lot of Cold War strictures, said that, you can say whatever you want. You can say you want to overthrow the government. You can say this, that, and the other thing. He was a Ku Klux Klan person who was at the core of it. And Brandenburg said, yeah, you can. Because, any reading of the First Amendment would say, you should be able to do that. But it actually had not been true up to 1969. And, as you start to dig into the evolution of the Communist Party USA, this is the first time they get confronted with this. I guess stepping back, if you'll indulge me, William McKinley is president, right? He is He's in Buffalo. There's this big fireworks display. Welcome, President McKinley.
And
President,
what year would that be?
I think it's 1901.
Okay.
Welcome, President McKinley, President of our Republic and our empire. Right? I mean, Trump, when he came to power and started doing the tariffs, they're like, oh, we haven't seen this since McKinley. But they kind of omitted the other thing that was going on with McKinley is like, he's in 3 years after the Spanish-American War, where the U.S. has taken the Philippines as a colony, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Guam. I mean, really kind of old school empire. And this is, McKinley. I mean, the U.S. is not this behemoth that it is today. I mean, even though it's on the downturn, it's in ascent. McKinley's in Buffalo, and the next day, an anarchist assassinates him, shoots him in the chest in a greeting line. McKinley holds on for 9 days. It's touch and go. He dies, and there's this huge wave in the media and the government against anarchism. Stop anarchism. Anarchy. New York State passes this law, criminal anarchy, that says you can't advocate the precepts of overthrowing the government, that it's a felony, in New York State. So you fast forward to 1919, the Bolsheviks have come to power. Communists are beginning to organize in the United States, mainly in these foreign language clubs, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, things of this sort. But there's some American, native-born people in it. The criminal anarchy law is trotted out in the wake of a series of anarchist bombings, which included Mitchell Palmer, who was the attorney general. Palmer lives, I guess, fortunately, I don't know, but there's all these raids against anarchists and communists, even though the communists don't have anything to do with it. Benjamin Gitlow, who is a communist, him and people like John Reed are kind of on the scene. Go see Reds again. I think I'm going to have to go watch that. It's a good portrayal of that period of time. But this guy, Benjamin Gitlow, who ends up becoming a renegade, but at the time he's a communist, he is charged with this criminal anarchy law. And it's kind of ushers in, this is the way we're going to go after the leadership of this group, because Gitlow has published, I don't think he even wrote it, something called, the title is something in the New Age is The Revolutionary Manifesto. And he's convicted. He's sent to prison. And 1925, the Supreme Court upholds the conviction and says, look, you don't have to be doing anything. We can't just sit around while these sparks are simmering, before they turn into flames. We can, quash it before it gets started. And this is the law of the land from, 1901, into 1969, where, just mere advocacy is a felony. After the New York law, 30 other states passed similar criminal anarchy, criminal syndicalism laws. And it seems like the communists are the ones who are getting hit with it first. So I set about wanting to write one book, and I figured out I had to write another book, even though it seemed to be a bit more challenging. And the way I write is kind of the way I read. I don't particularly find a lot of appeal in a 500-page book that requires all of my attention for months. I'm not a lazy person, but I just, I'm jealous of greedy with my time. So I try to kind of condense it down, and, maybe someday somebody's going to come and write a much bigger and longer and better book, and I'll be fine with that. I'll be happy about that. But for now, I think I've tried to come up with something somebody can pick up and, just, absorb rather quickly.
Aaron, as I'm listening to you, and you brought up repression in this way and bringing parallels, I'm thinking of, you mentioned the anarchist. I think of I think a lot about immigration currently and how it's being used as a political tool, weaponized against people or dissidents. And I think about Emma Goldman. There was the Anarchist Exclusion Act in 1903, and then after that there was the Immigration Act in 1918 to justify her deportation. And which is why I actually think that today this is actually what we're doing to people who are speaking out. And I think about the anarchist Ricardo Flores Magón as well, that was persecuted by Porfirio Diaz here in Mexico, and then used the anti-war sentiment that was in the USA also after Ricardo Flores Magón prosecuted for his anti-war stance. And I just I see all these parallels around how there is repression is not something that has stayed in the past, but that continues on, and it's a continuation. It's present in our lives even from the past. So I wonder, is that also like, do you see that as well? Do you write with the contemporary lens of what's happening in today's world, having, as a historian, seeing what's happening and how we're not actually learning from history, and we're doing a lot of the same things from U.S. authority, like seeing how U.S. authorities are doing just that, attacking, prosecuting, persecuting dissidents?
Yeah, well, a couple of things on that. First, Emma Goldman is rounded up in the first Red Scare. Her and Alan Berkman, am I getting the name right? They're actually deported. They're put on a ship with 400 other people who have been rounded up and sent to the Soviet Union. Several thousand people had been arrested, but it turned out a debate broke out. U.S. society being what it is, they do have this Constitution and this First Amendment, and it's real. It means something to some people. And there's a constant push and pull about to what degree are we going to respect it or not. So the thousands, J. Edgar Hoover actually said, after all these people are rounded up in these two subsequent periods of raids, he said these are perfect cases. He actually uses the kind of same terminology that Trump used in his first impeachment. He said, "Oh, it was a perfect phone call, he had with Ukraine," which I thought that was interesting. I guess certain legal mindset, but so yeah, anarchists were rounded up in the first Red Scare, but to the point of repression, there's the sociologist Max Weber has this principle of the state has the legitimate use of violence. I'm kind of paraphrasing that. Lenin talks about it in State and Revolution, and I think a lot of people who kind of come up and become radical or political are pretty naive about this. They're like, "Oh, we can protest, we can do this and that." But you are actually confronting a socioeconomic system that, sees you as a malignant force. You're challenging, if you get powerful enough, you're challenging its very existence. In other words, certain naivete about what you can and can't do. And, Mao had this famous slogan, which has been used to attack various peoples in different ways. That's a different story, but he says political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, which, it's just obvious. Why is Pete Hegseth doing what he's doing? Why did the Trump administration attempt to kind of get the military in a different mode? And it looks like, from what I can see, they're not doing a very good job, which I think everybody should be praising Jesus, that they're not. I mean, I'm not religious. I'm saying that ironically. It's like, I remember when Trump was running for president in 2016, and some commentator said, yeah, I'm nervous about this because the executive controls the guns. And, that's what you saw with the National Guard and deploying the Marines in LA and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, you can protest, you can speak out, but when it becomes, much more consequential, then, violence will be used, and reactionary violence will be used to suppress, radical or revolutionary violence. And that's what you see. And I think the secret wars of intelligence and spies is just this kind of low grade operation of how you maintain power. I mean, it's better to do it in secret and in the dark. The more open a society, the less you're going to see kind of the troops in the streets. I mean, it's when things break down, like think of Chicago in 1968 and the police just running literally riot against demonstrators. It's like, if you're controlling, the levers of power, you really don't want that. You want people going along. So I guess that's how I'd kind of go at that question. And then, the whole book is predicated on, attempting to keep this force in check. I do want to speak some about the spy stuff too, if you'll let me, because
if I can just make a quick comment before you do go into the spy stuff. I think what you're touching on is that there is this deception, or this illusion that the U.S. state is stating that they are claiming to defend democracy and order and national security and freedom of speech, and that they are the example of the world of what a democracy looks like. And what you've laid out in your book, I think, shows an example of a long history of repression, even to this day. And that's why I think it's important for people who either vote for Democrats or Republicans. I have family and friends on both sides. And for my Republican friends and my MAGA community, I ask them, where is their stance on little government, or even just their stance on immigration? Where is their stance on freedom of speech? And I think your book does a great job in trying to show that this isn't new and that this has happened continuously. So I'm just pointing that out, and also what you've talked about regarding right now the like Pete Hegseth going out and just outside of our borders to defend democracy or to fight narco terrorism, I think is another example of what's happening today, which is, again, we're touching on that there is a lie that's being told to us for why they're doing such things, intervention or defending democracy and working within a framework which is, we're just trying to defend our national security. So obviously we have to kick people out if they're not working within the mechanism, such as the people that you described. So
I think that's right. And because as you're speaking, it's just so tricky because, opposite things can be true. Like a lot of what I do is possible because of the Freedom of Information Act. I don't think most countries, have this ability to go to the government and get secret records revealed. I think it's something unique, and it's based on, this foundational principle coming out of the American Revolution of like, we should be able to print and say whatever we want. A lot of countries don't really have that. You can do things in the United States you can't do in many countries. I mean, you will be summarily, picked up off the street and put away, and there's no habeas corpus, which is, that notion has kind of been confused in the media. I mean, I believe habeas corpus literally means produce the body. You can't just tuck somebody away and hide them. You have to bring them forward and publicly, acknowledge, state what it is you have against them. So there are some very unique things about U.S. society, but that actually doesn't negate, the things you're pointing to, Eduardo, which is, You know, there's a whole lot of things you can't do, and there's a lot of things a powerful country will do that are aggressive and violent and destructive, including the United States, which kind of getting people who just want to. Well, I was thinking about this, when they were sending people to El Salvador recently. I was like, yeah, this is terrifying. But, Dick Cheney and George W. Bush tortured people, and then Obama came in and said, oh, we shouldn't look back. We should look ahead. I mean, what the hell are you talking about? We shouldn't look back. That needs to be spoken. People were, they brought dogs on naked prisoners to try to make people pee themselves, and they did it for sport. I mean, that's what George W. Bush and Dick Cheney were doing. It doesn't mean that Donald Trump stuff isn't as bad. I mean, both things are actually quite horrible and kind of goes to some core things about U.S. power, especially since World War II. So that, you kind of solicited, thankfully, some things I was thinking about. But
Aaron, are you speaking about the Freedom of Information Act?
Yeah.
That specifically?
Yeah, the Freedom of Information Act, which I just researched that recently. It's a legacy of the 60s. Because before that, you weren't having this. And the 60s in the U.S. it was certainly a cultural revolution.
Yeah.
But it did have revolutionary aspects. It never came close to, replacement of power and stuff. But, the core issue in the 60s, at least for me, a lot of people debate or are kind of a little bit amorphous about it, but it's like the most powerful country in the world is defeated in a war it wages in Vietnam. That's a big deal. If you lose wars like that, when you put everything into it, there are implications. And what happened in the 60s and the aftermath is testament to that. But, another topic beyond Menace of times.
Let's go into spy stuff. I don't want to just, but there is some reporters out here in Mexico. We also have strong transparency laws, and we have our version here in Mexico as well. And they're looking into what happened during the Olympic times of when there was a massacre here by the military. And they're delving into documents of the past. And so it is. I have been to countries where you can't access those documents. I can't access documents from the government. But yes, I understand what you're saying. You were mentioning about the spy. What did you want to delve into specifically on that area?
Well, the second book I wrote with Conor Gallagher is called A Threat of the First Magnitude. I was thinking about the book because it didn't get quite the other books did, but I feel it's like arguably one of the more important things I've written, which is like I was actually able to make an argument that there's a doctrine executed against radical organizations or organizations seen as being insurgent. And the doctrine is to attempt to get informants at the very highest level of an organization. And I tell the story of Roman Malinowski, who Lenin thought is this working class guy who's articulate. He's elected to the parliament, the Duma. And Malinowski is a czarist spy who's been compromised, who is like sending people like Stalin, to the gulag, right? Marx is actually manipulated by French intelligence who attempt to create discord between him and the emigre community in the UK. I think there's a professor friend of mine said, well, there's probably a dissertation to be written about that. But, Marx, this brilliant mind, is forced to send begging letters to Engels to survive. What if he had been more supported by the emigre community? It seems a valid question. you got Richard Aoki, this Japanese American radical who works with the Socialist Workers' Party in the early 60s and works with the Black Panther Party at its formation. And he's an FBI informant all his life. And then Morris Childs from the Communist Party USA is essentially Gus Hall's Secretary of State. He takes something like 72 trips to the Soviet Union and China and brings back millions of dollars to fund the CPUSA. But he's an FBI agent who's just passing along vital, global intelligence as well as, all the secrets of the CPUSA. In the RURCP, they placed this informant, Don Wright, who's on the secretariat of this group, which is the four-person day-to-day leading body. And Wright is there and sabotages certain initiatives. So there's, this is not just coincidence. This is like a doctrine. I'm writing a book now about Students for a Democratic Society. 80,000, 100,000 students circa 68, 69. And it breaks apart in 69. And the FBI launches a campaign called Top Rev, for Top Revolutionary, to try to recruit people at the very top of the Weatherman, Progressive Labor Party, and this group, Revolutionary Youth Movement, too. I mean, it doesn't go anywhere because these groups have a different history, but the doctrine is the same. And I'm like, so I was a radical for years. I didn't know this was the deal. But then I'm writing this book, and I see this article. I think it's from like the Comintern in 1920, 1921. I mean, it's in the book. My references might be a little sketchy. There's a problem. Once I write the book, I don't have to remember it, right? I mean, if you gave me a test on the book, would I pass? Jesus. Anyway, there's this article, and it says, the problem with these democratic centralist entities, the problematic is we'll get people in leadership and they'll be spies and they'll know more than the members. Well, this is actually a conclusion I wrote in Heavy Radicals, which was that the FBI and the top leadership of the group knew more about it in a certain period than most of the members did. And I was like, well, this is like fascinating that people decades ago confronted this very same issue, and it seems to have been forgotten. I mean, the whole problem of a coherent organization requires leadership and hierarchy. The leadership and hierarchy have their own problematics, but if you just, the phrase "herding cats," if you just have a bunch of activists that are a bunch of cats running around, I mean, how much can you do? It's A for effort and F for execution. So anyway, I had to get the herding cats in there somehow.
Well, I think what you're saying is going to get to Michael's question, actually, but I want a few things before I go to it. First off, both Eduardo and I in the show have made movements back and forth from left to right in terms of people that we talk to in our various political journeys. And a common critique I would hear from people who would either hail as more conservative or maybe libertarian of the left is, dude, your organizations were penetrated by the government. And when I first heard those criticisms, I was a little suspicious. I was like, wait, what, really? As time has gone on, it is more clear to me, particularly even reading some of the stuff that you put out, that these people do, like, they have created some of our organizations. They've been major authors of things put out, and I think there's real truth in it, and it's been a problem all along. And I would also say the one slogan from, I don't know if it comes from the union movement or Marxism or whatever, an injury to one is an injury to all, led me in my own work in the teachers union and in my school to really say, you can evaluate how fair your workplace is by how the worst worker is treated. And that was usually a pair of professionals, like they were just treated like slop. And I think that's really what's happening at our work. not what happens to us teachers who are treated better. What really is going on at work is how you want to know what's happening at work, talk to a paraprofessional. And if you really want to know the limits of our democracy, talk to a revolutionary who's actually trying to do something about it. Because I do think that's how how you can understand. Marx talks about capitalism as a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and he used that word dictatorship. And we can think about ourselves living in democracy, but I feel like your book, through the span of it and through the deep penetration of it, looks like the operation of a dictatorship, much more than a democracy. And I think that's why it's valuable, because I think we live in that same world today. Let me get to Michael's question, because I think it'll touch on some of the stuff. Oh my God, look at these phones. We'll touch on some of the stuff you're talking about, spies and today. And this is a two-part question, or rather, he has two questions about counterinsurgency. And I'll read them both, and then you can say what you want about them. He starts first. He goes, are you familiar at all with the concept of counterinsurgency being applied internally to the US? If so, do you think that counterintelligence has essentially been replaced by a more robust and holistic approach we can think of as counterinsurgency? And then that's question 3. But question 2 is, and I think it's related, how do you think the state has evolved this counterintelligence program? Michael's sense, my sense, is that they can actually rely much more on internal forces to essentially disorganize opposition movements. It also appears that in the post-civil rights period, the state grew a large poverty management apparatus, both in academia and in the NGO spheres. Have you seen any evidence of those official routes for getting reforms as essentially displaced or replaced having agents assigned to disrupting specific radical organizations today? So I think whatever you want to do with those questions, I thought they were interesting.
Yeah, no, they are, and I'm not sure I can hit them head on.
Yeah.
Okay, let me start. I recently had a revelation. So the FBI, in 1956, they start this counterintelligence program. I had some difficulty because I looked up the definition of counterintelligence, and it's kind of, it's going after domestic radicals, but really it's about going after foreign adversaries and upending their kind of secret networks. I mean, that's kind of the core of what counterintelligence is. And as I'm reading through the inaugural COINTELPRO document in 1956, it says, look, the Communist Party is in crisis. Nikita Khrushchev, he's gotten up and he's denounced Stalin, and international global communism is in turmoil. I mean, Khrushchev doing what he did, I make this analogy, would be akin to the Pope getting up and saying, I'm not sure about this concept of Jesus. I mean, it's like
Right.
it's like a fundamental questions of the first order. Well, the FBI is seeing this, the Communist Party, which had been taking it on the chin. And one thing is, my thing on repression is, generally speaking, I think these groups are still the authors of their own destiny. I think these informants and these countermeasures have serious consequences and they need to be evaluated. But I think if you look at the historical sweep, these groups have been able to, operate and do things. They've had agency. Yes, it's been impacted, but it's not like, by and large, they've just been tools or puppets of manipulators. I mean, there's been aspects and periods, but that is kind of my thing. I guess I would argue against despair or paralysis. Oh, there's nothing we can do. I think people, again, I'm not a revolutionary today, but I think people who are striving for a better world should do the best they can and try to, develop the means and mechanisms to be able to operate without just being neutralized, so simply and stuff. And I think it matters, whether or not you take these things seriously. So Khrushchev does his thing, and the FBI says, this is an opportunity. We can actually now work to destroy this group from within, because they're just so fraught contending over, what's the way forward and stuff. And this is the COINTELPRO that goes on until 1971, and almost 60% of the COINTELPRO operations are launched against the Communist Party USA. So, there's been several books written on COINTELPRO. You would think the first book would have been the one on the CP, and it didn't exist. I mean, you go to the FBI's website. I mean, if your listeners are curious, there's something called the FBI Vault. You can just Google it. There's all manner of files there. You can see Burl Ives' FBI file. You can see, names are eluding me, but everybody, you can see the COINTELPRO Black Hate, the COINTELPRO New Left. You can get Abby Hoffman's file. I believe you can get Jerry Rubin's file, Tom Hayden. But if you try to get the COINTELPRO CPUSA, it's not there. So initially I thought, that's interesting. Now, I actually, most libraries, the LA Public Library has this thing called Gale's Archive Unbound. And there they have the entire corpus of the COINTELPRO CPUSA. There's a lot of other really great things. It's just a wonderful resource, but I had to dig for it. And nobody wrote this book about the biggest COINTELPRO to go on, but it is kind of anchored in essentially counterinsurgency. William Sullivan, who was the FBI's guy who was a point man at COINTELPRO, talked about, essentially this was something, as he was testifying, Congress came out and made the point in the Church Committee hearings in 1975 that what was done against the radicals of the day was kind of an evolution of the post-World War II, almost a warlike effort against these forces. And COINTELPRO was like that. Sullivan famously said, it's a rough, tough, dirty business, sometimes dangerous. Dangerous for them, not us. And, you have people like Fred Hampton, who is murdered by the Chicago police with the help of an FBI informant who gives the floor plan to his apartment. People did die. People did go to prison, unjustly. People had their lives turned upside down. And, we talked about, Aaron Libson being, publicly outed and, attempting, unfortunately, unsuccessfully to try to kill himself because the FBI thought it would be a good idea to undermine the CP and Libson by publicizing this stuff. So, it is kind of a quasi-military thing. And, it does go to, if you step out against this thing in certain ways, the gloves are off. But then the other thing, and this is what confuses people, is, these laws actually do mean something, but they are kind of subject to both kind of the mass response, is there opposition to this? And then internecine squabbles at the very top of power. You're seeing this quite pointedly today, and I can't hold forth with some succinct definition, but things are much more complicated than just this unilateral power coming down. They can do whatever they want. They can do quite a bit, and they've done quite a bit. But then the people who are targets are not just this helpless Bambis in the woods. They have the ability to push back, and then there's other contradictions to be taken advantage of, which I guess is why I do what I do. If I was just telling a story and it's like, you can't do shit, I don't think I would have much impetus to do that. I do feel like actually understanding this can be helpful, aside from just being fascinating. Mm-hmm. And it is fascinating. So,
one thing I want to highlight from your book that Eduardo talked on is immigration, and it was surprising to me, is because you go through almost 100 years of history, and along the way, this question of immigration and deportation and counter immigration measures being tied so much to countering revolutionaries and countering opposition to the government. And this has been a really frustrating point for me and Eduardo, where coming up in the last 4 years is with a freedom movement that was rightly concerned about surveillance and data collection and biometrics being collected and AI being used in all sorts of ways to kind of control you, digital IDs, digital money being, ultimately moving into that direction, and the government controlling you through that, and vaccine passports and using that as ways of controlling where you can go. That movement, which came out as a freedom movement, wholly has bought the notion of immigrants have to be our problem, and in doing so are completely endorsing a whole biometric apparatus that they themselves oppose the state using, but are completely letting them do it so it can be used against immigrants as they come in. And it's I feel like if anybody read this book and saw the thread of attacks on immigrants as so tied to government control, they would see that, like, dude, you are once again allowing them to use immigration or immigrants as a Trojan horse to have them do policies that are going to be bad for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting because the stuff against immigrants, it's like it's 101 repression. It's like there is no recourse for somebody who is here illegally to be here, and they've used it against the communists thoroughly, and they used it against the RURCP as well. They used it against Buffalo Springfield. They used it against Blood, Sweat, and Tears. David Clayton Thomas was Canadian. He'd had a drug arrest in Canada. They win a Grammy Award. Blood, Sweat, and Tears was this pop group. They won a Grammy in, I believe, 1969. You Made Me So Very Happy. They were actually a pretty good band, but the State Department goes to Blood, Sweat, and Tears and says, we really like your lead singer, but we're going to deport his ass unless you go to Eastern Europe and talk stuff about communism. There's probably stuff to be talked about, Eastern Europe, but to be a vehicle for youth to denounce that in circa 1969 in the form of a popular, rock band was a very effective means, and they did utilize it. I did want to talk a little bit about the whole surveillance stuff because, again, this is a book that needs to be written, and maybe somebody's written it and I haven't seen it, but things are just operating at a higher level. So there's the surveillance society and all that capacity is just, in outer space compared to what it was. But then there's all this media and access that people who are formerly powerless have. What we're doing right here, this was unthinkable. It used to be you had to save up your pennies and get a steno machine and do a leaflet that, most people are going to throw it away. But here in a few clicks, you can be reaching hundreds, even thousands or more people. So, you've got both these things operating at the same time. One thing I was kind of realizing recently too is, the U.S. government, the FBI is kind of out of the business of internal security investigations. It stopped in the 70s because of the exposure. The Attorney General, Carter's Attorney General, basically wrote new guidelines, and the FBI systematically closed down all its investigations except for a few, including the Communist Party, because they were seen as the agent of a foreign power. The FBI now, they need a... Oh.
Yeah, you froze.
Okay, can you hear me? I should come back. I should be back in a second.
There you go. Yeah.
Buffering.
You should not talk shit about the internet, man. Don't do it here.
Yeah, so things are operating on a higher level. Some of you need a predicate of imminent violence to initiate certain investigations. But some of this stuff has been privatized, and then there's still local, like the New York police have an intelligence division, which, after 9/11, they brought in a former CIA guy. I mean, so there's a lot of nasty stuff still going on. But then just in the cultural and social sphere, I mean, this concept of doxing is kind of a COINTELPRO thing. And it's like, you don't need the FBI to do it anymore.
Oh, right.
You've got, reactionaries based in Africa, pumping out all this MAGA stuff. It's like, so COINTELPRO is closed down. And I don't think the thing is to kind of figure out how that's still going on. But there's something actually arguably much worse going on, but it's contended. It's not just sitting there off by itself. So it's kind of a thought, because it's not like, well, we lived through all that and now we're in a whole peaceful period. We're actually in a far more complex, arguably even more dangerous period. Stakes keep going up.
And speaking of surveillance, I was looking into what countries are the most leading countries of surveillance, and the USA, the United Kingdom, China is higher. But the fact that it's amongst the countries that we criticize, it's in that top tier. How embarrassing that is for a country that speaks of absolute freedom. So, so much for speaking about China. But the way that it's been measured is how many cameras and extensive legal and technical ways to monitor people's databases. But
well, as you say that, I'm thinking, I don't care about seed oils and ultra processed food. Get the surveillance out of my life. I'm probably going to live a lot longer. We're under an enormous amount of stress. It's like, you say one wrong thing or you do something, and oh gosh. It's not, it's like it gives dystopian a whole new meaning. But the countries you name, US and China, particularly, my friend Connor lived and worked in China, and it was, it's not what they say it is. On the one hand, it's not this evil, you can't do blah, blah, blah. At the same time, it's like, he was there during COVID, and it was like, you just couldn't go anywhere. I mean, and in the US, well, whatever. I don't want to back into something else, but I do, but I'm not going to.
I think
that's another discussion.
So for me, and that was, I think, the last question Michael had, and it was a question I had, and this is not going to be the last question necessarily, but is like, what is the state? What do you see as the state of counterintelligence, political, the kinds of things you're marking in this book about the state penetrating into the society to monitor its citizens or non-citizens for its activity? How would you describe that state today? And I want to answer that first, because the reason this book was so helpful is because I do think things have changed. I definitely think there are still agents N100 and FF22 that exist. Like, I know those people exist today. I do not think, unfortunately, by the low level of class struggle in the United States today, I do not think that is the major piece that is in operation. And once there is a higher level of class struggle, the physical agents are going to grow again. That apparatus will grow. But the way I actually see the surveillance system working today, I believe that with the data collection, with surveillance, with AI, and when Edward Snowden exposed all the data collection that was going on in the NSA, one of the things they were saying is we can't even do everything with all this data and metadata we collect. With the development of AI, now you can. Now you can have many things, because the AI lives on data, it grows on data, and it makes itself grow stronger in data. And I remember, you might not know this woman who talks a lot about the surveillance you're wondering about today, and her name is Alison McDowell. And one of the things that she talks about is this digital twins. And digital twins are largely known as like digital simulations of physical world things. But she's saying those things exist, and we talk about those as just as like oh, how do we simulate this thing for science? And how could you do this experiment on the computer? And she goes, you have to understand, they are not just building digital twins for physical objects. They are constructing digital twins for every single individual in society. And it's true. Like, if you look at social impact investors, that's what they're working with. They talk about who is that person today, and it's the assemblage of data that is collected through this window right now. Zoom collects it for people. All the companies collect it and assess it. And Doge really was a data centralization process, much more than it was awful to what it did to federal workers, but really the reason it came together was to centralize all federal data so it could be shared with each other. So you could build AI stronger, and that's why Stargate exists and things like that, or Stargate came into formation along that. So I now think each of us has our own Jacob Nosovitsky. That is like the AI that's around us. Our digital twin is being refined, tested, nudge here, nudge there. How does the digital twin respond? How does the person respond? How does that compare? Oh, the digital twin did this, but Andy did that. We're off on our digital twin, so we got to change our view of the digital twin. And I now think we all have minders. I now think we all have that person who is N100, but they exist in this data world. And so that's why I don't think, while we do get the ideas out here, I actually believe the fight for liberation is going to have to be offline, in my own thoughts about it. But I'll put that aside. We're going to exist here for a while. What I feel like is so helpful about your book is it gives me a way of understanding how awful, or how I don't believe in what was happening to Louis Farrakhan. I don't believe that's right. The government should not be doing that to that guy. But how is it happening today? And it helps me see it in that way. It says we all have our minders now. They've just changed.
Well, I don't know. Let me try to make a kind of summary point, because we've been all over the place.
Aaron Leonard, you should have known that this is what's left. You're not the only academic intellectual that's been on here and says, "This is what's left, people." They take me all over the place.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get some sleep tonight. Well, the thing. So I've written a couple things recently, like about work in the U.S., because we're in a funny period. You talk about AI. I mean, what's the essence of AI is we want to get rid of more and more workers. I mean, more and more dead capital, commanding, living labor and stuff.
To be efficient.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's something happening not just in the U.S. but globally, where more and more people are just being discarded. I mean, Marx had this concept of the relative surplus population. Frederick Jameson, who I got to talk to some years ago before he passed, he wrote a small book on Capital. He reread Capital, I think, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. And he said, I think really what Capital is about is unemployment, which I thought was fascinating. And it's a slender volume, and, I'm not a scholar of Jameson, but I really appreciated that book, and I got to interview him about it. And you do see that what's growing isn't the working class. What's growing is this population of paupers and people working at the margins of the economy. And that's getting bigger and bigger. And here you've got AI, which is going to feed into that. Now, at a certain point, humanity either exists or it gets nullified. So the question is, what's in the future? What's just beyond the horizon? And I do think, aside from the geopolitical shifts between U.S. power and China and things of that sort, what's on the horizon for humanity, and how it's going to go about sustaining itself, or is it going to get negated?
Mm-hmm.
Because the political economy of it is not particularly optimistic. I did a post recently, a little quip on Facebook about at what point are there going to be AI riots where people rise up and like Luddites of old. I mean, AI is just, it's malignant, and it's in the hands of people who think they're geniuses, but they're strategically idiots. I remember being at San Jose airport a few years back, and some guys walking back and forth, talking so animatedly out of the phone, and I'm like, dude, you're going to be out of freaking work in 5 years because that's exactly what you're doing. I mean, I used to do database development, and that's exactly what it does. It just eliminates and it eliminates and eliminates. So, as Joe Strummer says, the future is unwritten. I think it's probably going to be some convulsions. There's going to be upheaval. It's going to be hard. I think, I'm rooting for the good people, and that's kind of what you have to do. And not just because it's a nice thing to do, but because there is a basis to keep this project of human civilization going. There's a lot that can be done to understand the wonders of the world and universe we live in. And that is what we ought to be striving for. And I guess to the degree my writing impacts, being able to get past those who want to kind of shut down things, advancing beyond this capitalist paradigm, I hope it's helpful. I mean, that's my summary conclusion, I guess. I try to end these things on a somewhat,
Well, I'll add
without getting all Pollyanna, but it's like
I'll add a positive.
Life goes on,
Yeah, I'll add another positive, which is you mentioned John Reed, who I remember reading, the 10 Days That Shook the World, and when I read your Menace of Our Time, it's very fun to read. It's very readable, and it did remind me of some elements of reading John Reed's account of the Russian Revolution. Like it carries you along like a story while giving you kind of a historical thing to root yourself in. So I think you are successful at writing how you read.
Well, that's putting my name next to John Reed. That's kind of ooh.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, like, I had a lot. It's not fun stuff to read, but I enjoyed reading. Like, I found it very easy to get into, even if I didn't like some of the things I was reading, but the style you wrote it in made it really accessible, enjoyable, and like not just a downer.
My life will be affirmed if it becomes a 10-part Netflix series.
Yeah. Well, that's what we can dream.
Well, maybe BritBox. I don't know.
Well, I look forward to reading more. I've only read excerpts that I wanted to get through my library account. And for folks that want to get access to it, if they want to, they can go through the ebooks of it. So I thank you for being here with us, Aaron Leonard. I really do appreciate this discussion. And I apologize to all the academic intellectuals that have been on with us for going onto so many areas like a spider web. But thank you for holding on.
It's good I have Advil.
Maybe that's why we don't have any more
we invite them back, but they don't come back.
They're like, here we go too many fun.
They're like, I'd like to come, but I have to go to the drugstore.
Oh Lord.
Oh, all right. Well, it's been a pleasure. And also, thank you. And for folks that may not remember the connection, you wrote about Andy's uncle, which was very meaningful, and we even discussed it in an episode. So thank you so much for indulging us with more.
Well, it was a pleasure, and thank you both for taking the time and talking with me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Aaron J. Leonard is an author and historian focused on the interplay of radicalism and repression. He has published 6 books, including Folk Singers and the Burrow and Meltdown Expected Crisis, disorder, and upheaval at the end of the 1970s. His latest book is Menace of Our Time, The Long War Against American Communism. He lives in Sacramento, California. Right, that does it for this week's episode. What's left is a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests, the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at whatsthepodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast/channel and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard, or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. If you'd like to ask a question or something, you can always ask any of that in the follow up in the comments. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Andy Lipson, and thank you again, Aaron Leonard, and thank you all for listening. Ciao.